person. I'm happy that everybody could be here virtually, and I actually think this is an awesome opportunity for Pittsburgh. We always have trouble getting speakers, you know, to our location, so I'm really happy that we can get not only more speakers. We have Luke Sankey joining us from Minneapolis. Correct me if I'm wrong, Luke. And we also, I'm sure, have people attending from outside the Pittsburgh area. So this is really awesome to see. I also want to start by thanking everybody that was involved, especially the Tableau community team for helping us put this virtual event together. I want to thank all the speakers that have volunteered. Many of you in the community have actually reached out to see, you know, whether we're still having a meeting. Do I need any help virtually? So it was really great to see. And I just want to thank everybody who joined, whether you're in Pittsburgh or outside of Pittsburgh. I think not only Tableau, but the Tableau community themselves, so employees and communities have done a really great job of keeping everybody together and finding for us to just share knowledge, share information, and increase our learning while we're all stuck at home. So thank you. In order to make sure you guys are making the most of quarantine, I just wanted to share some information that's out right now. So currently you can get 50% off of the Tableau Desktop Specialist certification. So if you have been looking to upskill, please take advantage of that discount. And remember that on the Google Drive, we have a lot of those documents and links to, you know, blog posts and a ton of information that people who have already taken these exams have put out there. So please check for that. If you do not have the link to the Google Drive, please email pghtug@gmail.com, and we'll make sure to share that with you. I'll also share the link again on our LinkedIn page, as well as there's also free e-learning for 90 days. If you guys have not tried this, the e-learning is fantastic. I would recommend it to anybody. You can actually, the very bottom link of this page too, you can actually take a little quiz, and it'll tell you, you know, the best paths and e-learning pages for you to take advantage of, depending on your role and kind of how you use Tableau on a daily basis. This code, I believe it is good. You can take advantage of this up until June 30th, it says on this page, and you can actually start the 90 days then. So it's not like the 90 days expires. You have until the end of June to actually sign up for the e-learning and take advantage of 90 days of just free learning. Also, if anybody has been looking, I have seen some Pittsburgh people do some COVID-19 visualizations, but if you're looking for any extra information, there's also Tableau put together a COVID-19 data hub, and you can take advantage of all the resources there. And I believe there are a few data sets, including one from Johns Hopkins up there, as well as some visuals that have already been created. And then this last bullet here that I mentioned is a quiz that you can take to see how to best use the e-learning. Okay, and again, all of this will be shared, so you don't have to memorize all of this. We'll share these materials after today's session, but just wanted to make you aware of the things that are out there. As I do every meeting, just kind of showing who's here. You can see our big players are big again in our nice little word cloud. A lot of people from Highmark signed up today, so welcome, guys. But a lot of new companies that I'm seeing personally. Forgive me if you've attended before, but maybe there was only one of you, so you were very and I've seen you. Envision RX, Smith Brothers Agencies, and a bunch of other new people. So please, you know, reach out, say hi, you know, let us know how you're using Tableau. If you'd love to share anything, we're always welcome to have speakers, even if you just want to introduce your team and how you guys are using Tableau. As you can see, our user levels here. We're mostly in the beginner intermediate area, which is great. It means there's a lot of opportunity for learning. And I would reach out to those who identified themselves as experts or Jedis to kind of help foster and share their knowledge of Tableau with the rest of us. So who do we have speaking today? So we have two of our local people. We have Randy and Tyler. Randy's going to be talking to you about how he has discovered his Google geolocation data and what he's learned from that project and how you can do the same for yourself. Tyler's going to walk us through some new features from 2020.1, as well as some of 2020.2, which I believe was released last week or the week before. It was very recent. And then Luke, who is a partner at Tessellation, is going to be walking us through some dashboard performance techniques. And you should have seen on our page, I have shared, Luke and his colleagues have been doing a lot of awesome free training videos as well that I shared on our LinkedIn page. So if you haven't taken advantage of those, I believe they have a YouTube channel that has all of those things up there. So please check those out as well. A lot of great resources to learning Tableau. Just a few things since we are virtual today. So during the session, you will notice that everybody has been muted. There's no way to unmute yourself. So please, if you have questions during any of the sessions, please use the Q&A box, not the chat box. So we'll be monitoring to help you out. So if you don't see the Q&A, you see the little dot, dot, dot. If you click on that, you'll be able to see the Q&A box. Just please make sure your questions get there. We will answer them during the session if there's time at the end of each session. Any that we don't get to, the panelists will be answering them within that Q&A box as they can. If not, any we don't get to, I will make sure to get them answered and send them out to you after the session. The session is also being recorded, so if you have to drop off for a meeting or whatever, know that you'll be able to come back and see anything that you missed. And then as well, I'll be sharing all the presentation materials, including this PowerPoint slide and anything that any of the speakers share with me. That'll be available on our Google Drive as well. So again, please, any questions, don't hesitate to ask and use the Q&A box. So without any further ado, I'm going to shift things over to Randy, who's going to talk to us about some Google data. All right, pass you the ball, Randy.
Got it. And share content, screen 2, 5. All right, can you see my screen? We good? All right.
Yep, I can see it.
All right, first off, thanks everybody for being here. The attendance is really great. It's exciting to see so many people, and just thanks to Jen and the TUG leadership team. You know, this can be it can be exciting and anxiety invoking, but they've made things really easy, and so I'm excited to share this information with you. This is the Ping project. This thing has really kind of morphed and evolved. It started off like I imagine most of us do, with trying to come up with a data set that makes sense, something that I know something is off. And so, you know, play around with Superstore and other standard data sets, even the Northwinds database from Microsoft, which goes way back. And then it kind of transitioned and morphed into this thing that ended up being the Ping project. And it was about raising awareness about data privacy, ownership, and control of our own personal data. I went so far. These are not particularly current, but these are out there on social media. So if you're able to track along, and I'd be interested in your feedback. This whole thing started with the movie The Great Hack. This is truly inspired and performed by the Netflix documentary, The Great Hack. And from a data perspective, I can't imagine a more fascinating documentary. I'm going to walk you through some of the interesting aspects of this because I think it's really relevant to what I ended up doing in Tableau and what I'm continuing to develop there. But this documentary chronicles the story of a guy, David Carroll. He's a professor of media design in New York City, and he came to learn that a company, Cambridge Analytica, was professing to have something like 5,000 data points on him. And he said, well, that's interesting. I'm a little concerned about that. Will you share that information with me? And their answer was no. And so he got serious and he said, okay, well, I'm going to sue you for that data. And it's interesting because Cambridge Analytica was based in the UK. He tried to initiate the lawsuit in the United States, and under US law, the language around data privacy is just not there. We literally do not have legal language for him to have pursued that case. So he pursued it in the UK courts. And the reason that they have better able to do that was as a part of the European Union, in what is effectively the Constitution of the European Union, digital privacy is articulated as a fundamental right, just like our right to speech and our other rights. That's in the UK. So it was released July 24th of 2019. Nothing particularly exciting about that, but it was either total irony or good planning. That was the same day that the Federal Trade Commission announced a $5 billion judgment against Facebook for effectively violating an agreement that they had come to some years ago and deceiving users about the ability to control the privacy of their personal information. The next it's significant that the next highest penalty was $245 million against Equifax. So from $245 million to $5 billion, what in the world happened to get Facebook in that kind of trouble? They had exposed the data of 87 million users to Cambridge Analytica, including 70 million people in the United States. And the Cambridge Analytica CEO had boasted very publicly at the 2016 Concordia Summit that his company, Cambridge Analytica, had 4,000 to 5,000 data points on every adult in the United States. And they were using that information to predict personality and to influence behavior. Wait, what? So 4,000 to 5,000 data points, and to predict the personality of every adult in the United States towards the end of predicting or influencing their behavior. Let's take these one at a time to predict the personality. If you're in the modern workforce, if you've been in the modern workforce for any period of time, you've done something like the Myers-Briggs survey, the DISC assessment. It's something that rates you on various continuums, and just checking my time here. Rates on various continuums and gives some insight as to your style, how you interact with other folks. And so this ocean assessment had been around since the 60s. It got popular in the 1980s, and some researchers at Cambridge University and Stanford University did some really interesting work that ended up landing on Facebook as one of those assessments, and well beyond the what kind of car are you kind of thing. It was a My Digital Life assessment, and it was in this assessment where this is what got Facebook in trouble. They got in trouble because they put it out there, and of course you click the OK button after reading everything that you're supposed to read. And what people had agreed to was to share not just the information on their Facebook profile, but the Facebook information of all their friends in their network. So by the time it was over and done with, that's how they got to the 87 million. Why is that significant? A paper published in 2015, again, out of Cambridge University, University of Stanford, really pretty rigorous work here. They looked at Facebook likes and the outcome of the ocean assessment. And they said, they asked the question, how many likes would it take for a computer, machine learning, artificial intelligence, to be able to predict your personality outcome, the outcome of this ocean assessment, than other people that you know? I wish this is the only point in the whole presentation where I wish I could see people's faces. So the first was, how many likes would it take to predict your ocean score better than a work colleague? 10. Better than a roommate? 70. 70 likes will predict your ocean outcome with a high degree of significance, better than a roommate. A parent or a sibling, 150, and a spouse. 300 likes will predict your ocean outcome better than your spouse. So that's the personality point. This is really getting to the heart of the presentation. They said 5,000 data points. Now, when I heard it in the movie, when I dug in a little bit deeper, I can't imagine 5,000 data points on myself. I don't know that I could imagine 500 data points on myself. So where's this data coming from? Where can I put hands on this data? And it didn't take long. We talk about Amazon and Alexa and all the other things that are tracking and monitoring us. And even as I was putting this presentation together, it's easy for it to sound nuts. It's not nuts at all. I'll tell you, I want to say this on the very front end. As I went out to Google and started to ask the same question that David Carroll did, how much data do they have? How accessible is it? It's not just accessible, it's readily accessible. I'm going to walk you through, this is the heart of the presentation. I'll walk you through how I got to my data, the other data that's out there. Through these sites, we'll walk through them, but you can access, download, and in fact, delete your Google data. So ad settings, let's take a look at this for just a few minutes. Ad settings, when Google looks at me and I go out and I look at what is in my Google account, they've got it dialed in pretty good. If you look at my experience over the past, 3 to 6 months, this is kind of the stuff that I've been interested in and doing. I am definitely in that demographic, 55 to 64 years old. I definitely work for a large employer. I'm interested in home automation. They had my household income right. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but here's Tableau down in the bottom right-hand corner. So they've got me pegged on Tableau. But I think there's 151 discrete categories of areas of ad interest that they've identified for me. Takeout at google.com. This is where you can export. It's where I've exported my location data, but a copy of the content of your Google account to back it up or use it in Tableau. This is really interesting. Take a look, even at this first one that I don't have highlighted in green, but you can go out and download a JSON file of your Android device, every Android device that you've ever owned and connected to Google, and the software versions, the metadata, it's all there. All of the messages and attachments in your Gmail account. It makes sense that it's there. But again, you start sharing these stories and it just, it's fascinating. Titles and authors of all the books that you've looked at or purchased, Google Play Music, all of it, it's there. You can download it, access it. This, your location data, again, is what I really honed in on first. I've not done a lot of work, much work at all with any of the rest of it. But let's talk about, here's the location history. So again, I guess this is the other point in the presentation where I wish I could see faces, because when I downloaded the file, I'm about to show you how to do that. The first ping that I ever had, discrete, lat long, time of day, was June 9th, 2011. And the most recent one for the data set that I downloaded was, I think this is last Friday, on May 8th. So if you had to take a guess, as a matter of fact, if you can do that, if you feel like putting it up in the Q&A, I'd be interested to see what some of the guesses are. I'll give you a few beats here. This one comes in slow, but the number of individual times that Google has recorded my location data. 2,024,169 times. Forget about 4,000 to 5,000. 2,024,169 times. That just blew me away. When I first looked at this last September, of course, it wasn't that. It goes up about 20,000 per month, give or take. We'll look at some of that detail. And I was able to render this into Tableau. I am hedging my bets a little bit here. You can't always, this is just a static image of what I was able to create. But you can see on the left-hand side, a bar graph. This is for all time. And then the various areas where there's Pittsburgh, I work downtown, I've worked downtown in various capacities. Charleston, Virginia, that is my home. Born, raised in Charleston, West Virginia. Wilkinsburg, that's where I live. Every single one of those dots, the smallest as you can get on the slider in Tableau, is there. Oakland, I've worked in at the University of Pittsburgh for years. My girlfriend still works there in the cathedral. And of course, Stage AE, that's where I hang out as much as I can because they put on some really good shows, and it is one of the places that I am most eager to get back to. Just to zoom in a little bit, here's Oakland, zoom in of Oakland. So Tableau development, how's this thing work? We're going to go through all the usual candidates: data acquisition, prep, connection. The data acquisition. If you navigate to Takeout google.com or even account.google.com, it's going to present you a long list. I think there was, I said there was 52 in that one slide, that bottom left-hand corner, where you can download, select and download any of this information. Again, I'm just looking at the location data. It's going to prompt you to make some selections about file form. This varies by what content that you've selected. You're going to choose to create that export, and then it's going to take some time. The larger the file is, obviously, the more time it's going to take. You'll get a message that your data is ready. Log back in, download it, and then we're going to prep and clean it. I have all kinds of aspirations of using SQL and even Tableau prep. Once I get this file and I start working with it, I've been using Excel. I'll be totally honest with you. I struggle a little bit with the logic and structure of a JSON file. It's going to give you a couple of different formats. One that has path objects and everything else. I'm working strictly with what ends up being a really small number of columns. The reason that I've provided this slide with as much detail as I have is because it's still a little cumbersome for me. But this is the process in Excel to extract all of these fields into a format that I can work with in Tableau. And obviously, Tableau will read a JSON file. We'll talk some about. Well, let's talk this data prep. Those green fields that you see at the top are the only 4 fields that are returned in that file. It's a really simple, a small number of columns. You get a timestamp that's in microseconds. You get a lat and a long, they're in whole numbers, and then a score for value accuracy. The rest of these fields are fields that I've added in. Some of them are just absolutely unnecessary. The first one, time, if you've ever worked with, I guess this is Unix Standard Time, and there's something special about January 1st of 1970. This calculation will an actual date and time for each one of these points. Latitude and longitude, you got to divide each of those by 10 million. And then the rest of these are really just creating dimensions that I can render in Tableau. As I do this with each load, I'm going to, if I started off with, if I had 1 million records loaded, I downloaded another 500,000. For that, it's always going to return the largest, it's going to return everything. There's not an option that you can set to select a range, at least through this tool. Load it to a table, I add these columns, then I save it to a CSV. I bring it out. I've got to say, I was on this presentation, I had it cranking along, I was checking it, I was working on it every day, and I guess it was about a week and a half ago, I opened up Tableau, the relationships look different. I'm like, what in the world? And then, of course, I found out one of the next speakers is going to talk about the new relationships in Tableau. But I do a simple union with these, and then I add in a date dimension table on the right-hand side. This is a full join. And the reason I do that is, if you'll recall that bar chart, we'll be looking at it again. But for months, for example, for June through December, it would roll that. You're not going to show the empty months unless you've got something like that date dimension table in there. And that's really about as fancy as it gets. I'm going to back out of that one. And let's see if I can jump out to Tableau. Jen, are you seeing Tableau now? All right. So this is it. Here's all 2,024,169 points for each one of the months. I've got each one of these set. I do put I force a index number in there just so that if I've got questions, there is artifact here. And I was curious about this. For example, this point here, I don't recall in the past, close to 10 years being in Southern California. But the rest of this is real. This is where I've been, where I've gone, what I did. This is last summer, even in the air. So the tracking, if you've got Google services turned on, even in the air, I didn't swim this, I didn't walk it. That's air. These are points that were recorded as I flew from Mexico to I don't know if it's Dallas or Houston. It was one of the big airports. This will take a while to render and load. I'm going to go ahead and push this up to 2020. Here are those empty columns or empty months that I was talking about. The only way to keep that from happening is with the adding date dimension field. And you can see for, on average, if you look out over the whole history, and I've got another thing to look at this, we're talking about 20,000 pings per month. January. 2020 is going to be interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. This has the danger of really turning into like my summer vacation slideshow, right? So I'm going to avoid that. I think that your data is going to be much more interesting to you, but just in broad strokes. This is, I go to work down the busway. This is me down at the steel tower. Didn't visit home. Few pings here. I was in Oakland a few times to eat and do fun things. Remember, this is January, and nothing's happening at stage AE. February, not much of a different story. Again, I do not lead a very exciting life. March is when things really got interesting, right? So I did at the beginning of March, had a friend I needed to go see at home. So you can see, here's the drive. This is every ping on that drive down and drive. And here it shows up in Charleston, West Virginia. All of these are individual points. Went up to see an old house I used to live in. This is my mom's place. This, again, where I grew up. Wasn't in Oakland very much. Again, things really started slowing down, and you can imagine what April's going to look like. I'm home. I'm not downtown. I'm not at home. I'm not in Oakland. I'm certainly not at stage AE. All of these things that you see feel pain are doctor's visits, grocery store runs. I've really been pretty compliant. And then here in May, this is only up through about May 8th. I made a single run. My computer, I use a remote desktop connection, had to run down to the steel tower, down 376, steel tower. I was in, I was out, I was back home. On his pain, this breaks it down. I've got years across the top. Getting each one of these to line up by year. This is by week, and then by a month, and then by individual day. I have no idea what I was doing that was so interesting in December of 2013, but almost 70,000 pings in 1 month. It's still fascinating to me. I've not rendered it on this version of it, but it looks like maybe the total volume is starting to trend down a little bit. I don't know if that means because they've got their systems dialed in better now, or I don't know what it is. But that's generally what it looks like in Tableau. Coming back into PowerPoint, I was afraid that was going to happen. Bear with me while I go all the way to the end. So it's interesting from a Tableau perspective, but I think that anybody that's sitting in this audience today can imagine the potential applications both good and bad. And Great Hack arguably shows the dark side of this. The question I ask is, what do we do with this? We've all got this in some form or another. We've got access to it. How do we use it? And I don't imagine that it's black and white. It's fuzzy. I mean, there's a good side, there's a bad side, there's all kinds of potential. What are the potential applications? I'm sure they're already being developed for contract tracing or contact tracing, and so the sky's the limit. I found the whole exercise fascinating. As I share it with other people, I'm always interested in their feedback. If you have an opportunity, send me a message as to what you think. I'd be interested to hear that. I will tell you that since last September, Google has rolled out this tool now so that you can track on any individual day. They've built the interface for it, so you don't need Tableau, but it's just fun to do in Tableau. So thank you for the opportunity. I'll take questions, and thank you.
Just a reminder, if you have any questions for Randy, you can post it in the Q&A box. One question just said, is the presentation going to be available after the group meeting? Randy, I think you'll be happy to share like the PowerPoint that kind of outlines the steps so people can do this for their own data. Okay.
Absolutely, yep.
So yeah, Ben Smith, the answer to your question is yes. Does anyone else have any questions? Randy, I think that's incredibly fascinating, and I think it'd be cool to put some animations on that to see how much your traveling stopped during this lovely quarantine period. Yep. Did you say, you might have answered this, but I actually have a question. How far back, what's the earliest year that you have? And do you know like why that was the starting point?
I have no idea. I've got to imagine that that's when I transitioned to truly a smartphone, as opposed to those old bricks that we used to carry around. I don't know that. I don't know. June 9th, 2011.
June 9th. Okay, so it goes back to 2011. Very fascinating. All right, well, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. Does anyone have anything else? So if you do think of any other questions, again, feel free to post them in the box. We can answer them while this is going on, or get your answer after the session. So I'm going to go ahead and Randy, I'm going to throw the controls to Tyler. He can walk us through some new features.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Randy.
So I think you need to stop sharing, Randy, and then you'll be able to make me presenter. But you're getting lots of text applause, so great job on that. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Work out. Here we go.
All right, I am the presenter now. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm now sharing my screen. Give me a thumbs up, anybody, if you can see this. All right, perfect. So my name's Tyler May. I know many of you on the call here, but I'm a solution engineer at Tableau, and I'm in the healthcare and life sciences vertical now at Tableau. And I'm actually based in Pittsburgh, and I'm really excited to talk to you about what's new. So we just recently released 2020.2, so I definitely wanted to add that into today's presentation and talk a little bit more about some of those new features. If you have any questions for me that you don't think of right now, but you'd like to follow up with me, my email is pretty easy to remember. It's just tmay@tableau.com. So as in Salesforce manner, we always like to start by saying thank you. Thank you all for joining today. I know it's been a difficult few months, but I also would like to thank Jen and Amelia for all their work getting this all together. And I thank all of you for your time, and hopefully you can get something out of this. And so I wanted to kind of, before I get into what's new, I want to just highlight what Jen talked about and just briefly mention the COVID Data Hub. If you're not familiar with this, if you just do a search, you just do Tableau COVID Data Hub, you can see You know, we have thousands of visualizations out there now on COVID. There's also data sources that are reliable on here. There's different ways that you can access it. So if you're interested in COVID data at all, I would highly recommend that you check out the Data Hub. I will tell you that my mom is very computer illiterate, so I built a dashboard for her based on Pittsburgh, and I know, you know, legislation's changing, things are changing in Pittsburgh area. And last night I was actually looking at Allegheny County's website, and they actually have this is probably going to reload if I click anything, but they actually have a Tableau dashboard right on Allegheny County's website. So I don't know if the person who made this might even be on the call today, but I thought this was really, really cool. And you can actually see each individual neighborhood in Allegheny County. So thank you for whomever put that together for Allegheny County. All right, so we're here to talk about latest features. We don't want to talk about coronavirus all day. So if you're not aware of this, I think I talk about this website almost every time I present on the new features, and I like to stay away from slide decks because they just become, you know, they become tiresome. So I like to stick with the website because it's a little bit more dynamic. But if you're not familiar with this, it's just, there's an all features page at tableau.com, and it has every single feature that's been added on the tool from the beginning of Tableau. So if you're in an older release and you kind of want to see, you know, what came out in that release or what's going to be available between your release and the latest one, you can come to this page and get a full view of that. So for today, we're going to start by looking at 2020.1. And 2020.1 was a big release that came out in the first quarter of this year. And the sort of the most, I guess, most upvoted idea on the Tableau forum was always dynamic parameters, right? And if you're not familiar with what that is, that's basically, you know, you can create these parameters that allow you to build some more dynamic capabilities into your dashboards. And if you ever had a parameter that had the values change or need to be updated, you would actually have to go into Tableau Desktop. You'd have to manually update the parameter and then publish that workbook back onto Tableau server so that your users could get, you know, the latest data in that parameter. Well, now with dynamic parameters, that's been automated. So let's look at an example of that. Okay, so what we're looking at is Tableau Desktop, and you can see that we're looking at Superstore data. If you're brand new to Tableau, Superstore is a fictional store that sells a number of different products in technology, furniture, office supplies space. What we're looking at is sales data based off of those categories. And in the top right corner, we have a parameter here. And you can see I have furniture selected. And if I just change the category I've selected, if you look at the bar chart on the left, you'll see that it actually will show the next subcategory down. You know, this capability has always been in Tableau, but just imagine if Superstore started selling additional products such as clothing. And so, you know, I just added clothing in there and it's showing up in my parameter. So how do you set that up? So I'm going to go into this sheet and I'm going to just show you quickly what that looks like. So I have this selected category parameter, and if I go to edit it, we have some new capabilities within the parameter itself. So anytime the workbook is opened, it will then go back to the category field inside this data set to pull the latest list. So again, previously you had to go in here and manually add it, or you could have it refreshed based on the field, but now that's going to be done when the workbook opens or when the view is loaded on Tableau server. So that's how you would basically add that type of dynamic parameter to your visualizations. So that's not the only addition. There's some more advanced things you can do. A common use case with Tableau is to have a date range that is updated with today's date or the latest date in the data set. And again, previously this was a bit of a challenge to have it preset to today's date. There's obviously some workarounds. You could use an extension or things like that, but you can see here that our date range end is today's date and the start is actually 3 months ago. And we have this nice viz, but how did we get this to actually show today's date? So if I go into this sheet, I will show you. So first things first is we have these two calculated fields, right? We have one that's called today. So I'll just edit that. And that's a simple calculation. If you're not familiar with this one, it's basically just displaying today's date. It's a function within Tableau. So we're just pulling today's date. And then if I edit the 3 months ago field, again, that's a simple date add function. That's just one of the functions that are available in Tableau. And it's basically just taking 3 months ago from today. So pretty simple calculations, but they become very valuable when you combine them with these dynamic parameters. So if I look at our parameters down here in the bottom left, I can go into the end date. And here's the other area that's additional to the way that the parameters used to look. So now when the value or when the workbook opens, the value is actually based off of that today field that we wrote, which is just today's date. So you can actually select any date field because we have data selected as the data type. So for the date end, it's always going to be today. And similarly, if I just quickly show the start, it will be 3 months ago based off of that calculated field. So I'm sure you guys can see the value in this. I mean, it's going to make things a lot smoother when you need to update parameters. You have additional options here to have your underlying data be queried when the workbook is loaded on server or in desktop. So I'm assuming there's cheers going on because I know of a lot of people that were having this problem where they'd have to republish their workbooks almost every day. So hopefully this is a big one for you. Okay, the next big feature in 2020.1 is actually viz animations. Viz animations, personally, I thought they were something that was just sort of frivolous, but when you think about it a little bit more, these animations actually add another pre-attentive attribute to your tool belt. So pre-attentive attributes are, things like color, shape, size, things like of that nature, and now we're adding in animations to that. So it's a really easy thing to set up. I'll show here in a second, but I wanted to show a couple examples of this from Tableau Public, and I'm sure these will each load when I click in. But the first one we're going to look at is just lifetime sales by video game console, and it looks like we're sorted by company right now. I can see that Nintendo has the highest sales, followed by Sony, and so on. If I go ahead and switch this to by console instead of by company, you can see that those bars in a fancy way kind of move around, right? And so it's easy for you to see how that selection has changed the order. So I can see that, quickly this jumps up there, for example. So there's a lot of applications for business as well, where if you make a selection and then things slowly transform, you can kind of pinpoint things a little bit. One other quick example is with the NFL draft. I just thought this was rather interesting, where basically we have the years across the top, so each bar is a different year, and then across the horizontal or vertical here is the draft order, the draft pick. So for example, we have QB selected. We can see that 24 first picks have been for quarterbacks. And then you can see each green dot is that pick in the first round. So if I just switch this to something like wide receiver, we can see, they're picked much later in the first round. But if I look at defense or things like that, the animation just really highlights how things are changing. So the animation is actually adding value to this analysis. So defensive ends are really highly picked. Okay, so that was two examples quickly. Let's just show it in Tableau, and let's talk about how you can add it to your visualizations right away. So right now they're actually set up on this one, but the way that you add these is you go to Format and then select the animations. And you have a number of different options here. So right now we have very slow selected. So if I click on Texas, for example, you can see that all of the vises very slowly move to that selection. So having a slow transition time can really highlight changes. So if, for example, if you look at this chart over here, it really shows me quickly that our profit for technology is way down. But let's say that's a little too slow. You can obviously change that to some preset options, or there's a custom option. It's in seconds. I have found success with the medium, just as what I have liked to use. It's the very slow can become tiresome unless you know exactly what you're looking at, but you guys can play around with that. There's also simultaneous versus sequential. So if I select, for example, this one, they're gonna each move in their own time and not in a, all not simultaneous. They're gonna go in order, and you can define that order. So there's a lot that you can play around with this. It's very easy to add, but I will pause there and say, please use these responsibly. It's kind of like the Vision tooltip, where if you go a little crazy, I think it kind of takes away from what you're trying to show. So use animations responsibly. Okay, the last feature that I want to chat about is buffer calculations. And buffer calculations are just an incredible addition to Tableau. You really only need 3 different values. You need a location, you need to supply a distance from that location, and then a unit of measure. So miles, kilometers, meters, whatever. And then you can basically put a buffer around any point within your Tableau viz. So in the example in this screenshot here is you have a point, and then you have 1, which is 1 mile, around any point on here. Excuse me. So it's a very simple calculation. So you can use one of the previous features from 2019, which was make point. So if you're not familiar with that one, you can make these points with that field, and then you can use that with your buffer calculations and then have this really awesome map built off of that. And so what I wanted to show, of course, the WebEx is blocking it. Let me see if I can get it. Oh, bear with me here for a second. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to show was just a quick example, and I really think that this is tremendous work by this blog, dataviz.blog, and they have a whole write-up on how you can do this right now with your data. And unfortunately, I don't have all the time in the world to show you how this is done, but it is very simple. But this walks you through, a use case and how you could use the buffer calculation. So I'll make sure that this gets shared out with everybody. So basically, each dot in this map is a competitor's location in the city of London. And there's also another data set that has potential locations that our company could rent or buy, so they're target locations. And so what we want to do is figure out in these target locations, where are there the least number of competitors, right? So you can use the buffer calculation to determine the distance from those potential locations to buy or rent. And so this is just a simple adding in a 350 meter buffer. But the true power of this comes when you join these 2 data sources together based off of the points. So in this example here, you can see that we have those potential locations, and then we are only showing the dots of the competitors that are within that buffer zone. So for example, this location seems to be much more it's much more or less saturated than a location like this. So you may have better success opening a location there than over in this location. So, you know, there's a lot you can do with these buffers as well. You can put a buffer on every single competitor if you wanted to. You know, you can also make the buffer size dynamic. And the way that they built that in here is they've just added a parameter here so that you can kind of update the size of that circle around your locations. So there's a huge amount of application in the business world for this. I'll just quickly highlight this blog here again. I just think this is really fantastic work. And the area that I wanted to show is that, you know, it's a very simple calculation to create this, this buffer point. And then they even talk about here how you can join different data sources off of this data point. So I will make sure that this gets shared out so you guys can try it with your data sets. Okay, so I'm going to transition over to the 2020.2, but I want to take a pause here and see if there are any questions that have been thrown out there that I could stop and answer before I move on to the next section.
We got one question, Tyler. Jeremy asked, does adding Viz animations increase the system resources needed on server significantly?
Not significantly. I will say that if you're, I mean, it sort of works with the number of marks that are in the dashboard. So, you know, if you have 1 million marks and you're trying to animate 1 million marks, there is a performance implication there. So, again, viz responsibly, as they say. Thank you for that question. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to 2020.2. And the first thing that I want to talk about is something that I think, you know, that Randy alluded to, and it's this relationships model. Okay, and this is has been touted internally at Tableau as sort of one of the biggest advances in Tableau since we came out with the hyper data model. And really, it's just a new way for people to bring data together in Tableau. And it's, I'm going to switch back over to this, and it's really a powerful tool that you can use. But I will stop right there and say, you don't have to use this. Okay, this is something additional. It's not going to break anything you've done previously. You can still do joins the way you did before. So as I walk through this, just remember that you can still do things the way you did before, but now there's additional opportunities for you to leverage some of these more advanced data models and advanced use cases. And so what we're trying to do is make it easier to perform analysis across multiple tables of data. So historically, we have done a lot of work in data preparation. So there's kind of like multiple stages in development with Tableau, right? Where you would go and you would find the data that you needed, and then you would try to get it to the correct level of detail, and then you would put it into Tableau and then start doing your analysis. And sometimes that led to a lot of complicated level of detail calculations and some you know, different level of detail challenges that arise with that, because not all your data is at the same level of detail. And so now we're trying to make it much easier to relate your different tables together, and then analyze things much faster and be able to, you know, use that same data source for a number of different analysis. So with relationships, they're a flexible way to combine data from multiple tables. You know, users can define the matching fields between these tables, and then Tableau generates automatic joins based on the current state in your analysis. So think about that for a second. So when you're using these relationships, it's not actually doing any joins until you drag something out into Tableau Desktop. So it always maintains the level of detail of the original data source. And so that adds more context to your analysis, and it just makes it's easy to use and it makes sense, right? So you're not going to have to do these massive level of detail calculations. You still can. Again, I'll say that. And there still are some use cases for level of detail calculations with relationships, but you should have to do them a lot less. And so some of those benefits that you'll get from using this is there's less upfront data preparation. So again, previously you had to kind of pre-aggregate data so that the level of details matched, or else you would need to do these complex level of detail calculations, or you'd have to use the max, for example, for a lot of different things because rows values were being duplicated. And now, you don't need to do that. Tableau automatically combine the tables at the right level of detail while you're doing the analysis. And some of our customers are calling this ETL on the fly, and they've seen a lot of additional use cases that are accomplished with this new relationship model. So another benefit is you can have more analysis scenarios per data source, because the level of detail is always being defined within the dashboard itself or within the workbook. So think about that, like one data source can then handle many levels of detail and may be used on a number of different analysis and not just sort of one-off analysis. And then people can trust their results better because when you're doing these joins before you bring it into Tableau, oftentimes it can be tricky, and sometimes there's a few errors that are created from that, and then you're unintentionally filtering out some of the data. And with relationships, you're basically going to preserve that underlying level of detail so that you're always going to have it, and you can use it when you need to within your worksheet. So let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. And previously, and again, you still can do this, but you would have to join your table to create a third table, right? And so that third table, so the larger one in the screen here on the right, is what you would then connect to Tableau with, right? And so then, all of that analysis is only occurring on that combined table. And so relationships will basically combine and analyze simultaneously. And so what we mean by that is that things occur on the fly. So you're maintaining the two separate tables, but then it's creating this third table as you analyze. It's not something that's static. And I think the first question that people would ask is, is this going to perform as well as joins do? And the results are, yes, they're actually performing faster in a lot of areas, because sometimes you are using a much larger data set just to meet your level of detail demands. So you're making a really wide or really deep data set just to get the level of detail you need, whereas this is sort of optimized for tables of different levels of detail. So I know this is maybe slightly complicated for some folks. I'm going to go into an example here in a minute, and I think you'll see the power of this. But again, these relationships are level of detail aware. They they preserve their native level of detail in their tables, as opposed to just having the one table that gets joined together. And then again, I'll just say this one last time. I mean, the analysis handles these unmatched values, and you can change between the different join types while you're working in your worksheet. So you can have an inner join, a left join, right join, or full outer join, all in the same dashboard on multiple worksheets. And then, it's very dynamic, where it's only pulling in the tables that are required for the viz itself. So think about some of these more complex data models that are out there, snowflake schemas, things like that, where in your analysis, you may only be using the fact table and then one other table, like an orders table, for example. But then you have 20 other tables that are out there. Well, with relationship model, you'd only be using those two tables, the fact table and the orders table, if that's all you're using in your analysis. So it's very aware of resources, and it will pull in the right data for your analysis. Okay, so I've talked about this enough. Let's just let's take a quick peek at what this looks like. Okay, so I'm in Tableau Desktop 2020.2, and we're looking at a population size, right? And for this example here, we're looking at the population of London, which is around 8.8 million. But what I want to do now is I want to analyze the crime statistics with London population. So if I go into my data source and I want to add in some crime detail, you will see that this screen looks a little bit different than it used to. And if this is your first time looking at the relationship model, I recommend clicking Learn More. There's a lot of videos, there's documentation out there on how to use the relationship model. But again, if you want to use it the old way, so you want to just do a regular join like we've done in the past, you can just double click on your data source, and now we have that same screen that we had before. I can add in my crimes, and Tableau will join based off of the matching field. And again, I can still create whatever type of join I want. I can change my join fields, things like that. So this is what it would look like in the past for us to join these two data sources together. And then things like this would happen, right? Instead of 8.8 million, my data set is blown up because of how I joined it. And I joined it based on neighborhood, but there were multiple crimes per neighborhood. So my population size just blew up, right? So this was a challenge to deal with before. And a way we could accomplish this is basically just use the max population. But in this scenario, it actually wouldn't work. I'd have to write a more complex level of detail calculation to get the right number. So with relationships, let's try to do the same thing here. If I go into edit this data source here, so instead of me double clicking into this and making it an actual join, what if I just try to relate these tables together? And so I don't know if you've heard, but folks from Tableau call this the noodle. So it looks like a noodle that's kind of relating all these other tables together. But when you go ahead and you drop in another table, the same thing happens where Tableau will try to relate these tables based off of the common fields. And so you can add in additional fields. You can do the same types of joins that were done previously. There's also some performance option. This is for more advanced users, and I would recommend not changing these unless you have played around with this for a little while. But there are instructions on some of the things that you could change here. So the difference between what we did on the last data source and this one is this one's leveraging this relationship model, and these are related just based off of their neighborhood name. And so when I look at that and I drag out my population now, let's put it on text, my population is correct, and I have a list of fields from the crimes table, and I have a list from the population table. So if I tried to do some more analysis on this with the different neighborhoods, I will always have the correct population because my two data sources separately know the level of detail that they are. And when I use any of the fields inside of those tables, it gives me the correct numbers every time. So this is a simple example of how you can use the relationship model to get something like population correct. All right, so let's look at another example of this. And let me update my data connection here. Okay, so for this example here, we're looking at basically two different ways of pulling this data. So on the left, we're looking at property prices versus the crimes per capita. And on the left, we use the old method, which was to make, join tables together and make a one concrete data table. And so you can see that it's giving me, for example, Westminster, 23.7 crimes per capita. The average properties are much higher price here. So more crime and a higher price. And if I go in and I actually look at these data points, and I look at the summary data or the full data, it's actually the same thing, right? Because we had to create this very strict table that gave me these values the way that I wanted to. And so my data set is really only useful for analysis like this. But if I go and I look at using the same data, but using the relationship model, if I click on Westminster, for example, oops, and I look at the data, I can see that same summary data, but then if you notice here, I have a different tab for every data source that I related to create this table. And then when I go in and I look at crime, I can see all of the crimes for Westminster. And then I can see, all of the house sales for Westminster, and then similarly with population, all the neighborhoods in Westminster. So, these things are all happening on the fly. So the end result is the same, but we have a lot more flexibility here with this data model. And so, for example, if I wanted to look at, I don't know, let's look at burglary and detached homes, right? This type of analysis would be much more difficult in the old way of just creating a table that you've joined together. So this really is another example of how useful this relationship model is. So those are just a couple examples of the relationship model. I was telling Jen and the TUG leadership team here that there's probably an opportunity to potentially do a deeper dive on this, since it's probably going to be new for a lot of people. But I would recommend to not be scared of this. Try out the relationships, see how you could do deeper analysis with this relationship model versus joining. But that's all I wanted to show on this, and I'm going to switch over to the last thing I wanted to talk about here, which are metrics. And metrics, I don't know if you guys have heard of these, but this has been the thing that I was most excited about. I remember prior to joining Tableau, I was at Tableau conference in Austin, actually, which is several years ago, where this was actually shown on stage that the metrics were going to be available down the line, and now they're finally here. And metrics, they're a simple way to kind of get a data point trending over time. Something that you want to monitor at a glance very easily, and it's really mobile friendly. I was going to try to present on my phone actually these metrics, but we weren't able to get it to work on the event. But definitely please check these out. I'm going to show you how they work and how you can build these metrics very easily on Tableau server. Okay, so we're looking at my Tableau Online server. I'll give this thing a second to catch up. Let's see if it will refresh. Okay, perfect. So we're actually here. All right, so if you look on Tableau server now, there's a metrics box here. And this kind of works the same way alerts work, where if you select anything in the view, you can make a metric of it. So when I click on metrics, I can, let's say, for example, I want to just track this number, and I want to keep getting this number refreshed. I could just do, total cases. And then remove this. I could create that. And let's say I want to look at, I don't know, doubling time. I could do the same thing, right? I have this nice metric over time, and then I can create that. All right, so you can essentially do this for any value out there. So think about the few metrics that you have at the top, these big angry numbers or whatever you want to call them at the top of your dashboards. You could create metrics for all of these, and then when you log into your cell phone, or if you're using the mobile app, they become a very quick way for you to monitor these values over time. There's also a few other functionality built into the metrics themselves on mobile devices, where you can change how you're viewing things over time. So for example, if we look at sales here, you would be able to look at you know, the sales of the current week versus the prior week, and there's just a quick button that'll show both of them at the same time, so you can compare one line over the other. It's just a really powerful tool for executives to kind of monitor these really high-level numbers that they want to follow, and it just makes things easy for them, and it is a really nice package on mobile devices. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to share about metrics. They're a really easy way to get more insights and faster way to monitor different metrics. Okay, awesome. So the actual last thing I wanted to share are some enhancements to Ask Data. So if we were out in person, I would have a show of hands on who's actually using Ask Data right now. And I hope it's an area that you guys are exploring for your users, because I think it's an area that you know, people that don't have Tableau skills, I think it's a way for them to kind of harness the power of Tableau. So one of the most notable changes with Ask Data over time has been kind of the smart aspects of Ask Data. I think for one example would be, let's look at subcategory. If I go in and try to edit a field, I can actually look at all of the values within that field, and I can sort of make synonyms for any value inside of these individual fields. So, you know, one area we got a lot of questions about was, you know, in my company we don't call furnishings, we call them furniture. So you could, you know, quickly, you could add in synonyms here as well. So that's one aspect that's been in the tool for a few months now, but it's something I wanted to highlight because I'm not sure many people have seen that. And then the newest piece from 2020.2 is being able to kind of add your own questions. So initially when you log in to Ask Data, it will provide you with a series of questions that you know it has guessed that might be asked based on the data fields. So you know, what are the sum of sales, things like that. And you can actually go in and edit these things. You can add in, so I can edit this title and say start here, for example, and then I can add additional questions like give me the sales and profit by product. And then that gets added to this list. So, you know, one of the comments that we got from our customers was, hey, I would like to own this so that if executives come in here, we could have some pre-built questions here that they might want to ask. And then, you know, if you just click, you get, you know, Ask Data goes out there and it gives you a response. So in this case, we have a nice scatter plot. And then people can start iterating on the question from here. Okay, so we went through a ton right there, and I have 2 minutes left, so I will just leave you with this thank you, and also let you know of another webinar that we're running with the healthcare and life sciences team on the 21st. So if you are interested in hearing some use cases around resiliency with COVID, please join us. But I'll leave the last few minutes for questions. I think I saw a few come in.
Yeah, Tyler, there was one more question. Elizabeth asked, can you create relationships using published data sources?
That is a great question. And right now it's not set up that way, but I know that's something that's on the roadmap to allow for that.
And the other one real quick is that Chris says, we do our analyses with Live Connect. How do relationships work with Live Connect data sources?
So it works the same way. It's you know, it's going to query anytime activity's done on the dashboard or when you're designing. It's going to query on the fly. The difference is that you know, the queries are going to be more optimized for whatever table is being accessed in your analysis. So I definitely recommend using the performance recorder. If you've not used that before in the past, you can kind of check that out and see how the queries differ. But those great questions. I highly recommend you guys checking the relationships out. I think they're a real game changer with data preparation and doing more advanced schemas.
And I'll just add to that, Tyler did mention, he went through a lot of stuff very quickly. If there is an interest in diving into relationships or any other features that he went over, if you have additional questions, again, post them in the Q&A. We'll make sure they get answered, and reach out to me, email me, reach out on LinkedIn if there's a desire to deep dive into any of these specifically. We can have, an additional meeting or make sure to include this content in a later meeting. So just let us know. But thank you, Tyler. So last but not least, I'm going to turn the controls over to Luke, and he's going to show us how to make sure our dashboards are performant. All yours, Luke.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We're getting close to lunchtime, and you'll hear a child in the background having a meltdown. So we'll have a fun time through this presentation, that's for sure. And now I've got my screen up, and we're gonna talk about the perfect thing right before lunch, optimizing Tableau workbooks. And I just want to give a little bit of background about myself. It's worth noting that I guess I'm a two-time Tableau Zen Master. I've been using Tableau since 2013. I lead a community thing called Workout Wednesday, workout-wednesday.com. On Tuesday afternoons, we release the challenge, but it's already Wednesday somewhere else, so we released it Tuesday. And then in the afternoons, or sorry, on the weekends, we post the solutions to those challenges as a video. And plus, the community is also sort of sharing on Twitter their solutions, and also on the Tableau forums. I try to put out a blog once a week. It's been a little bit more difficult the last 10 weeks or so to get those out. And then I also post sometimes what I would call weekly videos on a tip, and try to keep everything pretty short. So that's just a little bit about the contributions. And then, here's some of the things that I've done. Like the top left here is my very first Tableau public visualization. I've done like some things with the Minnesota Twins tickets. I was for a while like getting data and trying to like get it off of StubHub and analyze when I should buy and sell tickets. And Harry Potter. And then more recently, I've been more focused on a lot of the components of Tableau and how we can create interesting things with it. And oh yeah, so like about me, I run a consulting firm called Tessellation. We're not massive by any means. We're 15 people, and we focus on Tableau and some other tools as well. And then as a result of the work that we've been doing, we're working on building this self-service analytics training platform called Data Coach. We're based in Minneapolis. We've got clients everywhere, and we actually I have a client in Pittsburgh, and then I reviewed my notes, and I was like, oh, we have more than one client in Pittsburgh, so terrible on me not to know where our clients are located. So it's just a website thing and more of the same. Oh, and then outside of work, I'm doing a lot of stuff, and obviously for everyone in the background, you can hear, I also do full-time daycare for the last 10 weeks for my 2-year daughter. My wife's running the show right now. There she is. All pictures taken in the last week. This is not our house, by the way, in the middle. I found it hilarious that we were going for a walk, and she just decided to go up some random, really nice house and sit down and kind of say, my house. And I was like, okay. So she's got good taste. But anyway, we're here to talk about building performant workbooks and efficient workbooks, whatever. There isn't really, just to give you like a heads up, that nothing I'm going to present here is going to be mind-blowing by any means. Often when we're creating a performant workbook or we have something that's inefficient, it's really due to the fact that we've just made a lot of little mistakes that have added up over time. And that creates a slower workbook. And when we have a slower workbook, we're not able to make decisions as fast, and the users are annoyed. The experience isn't as great. And of course, if you have that crappy user experience, they're going to say, I'm not going to use this. And just for ourselves, if we're working with more than one person, having a workbook that's fast makes it a lot easier to collaborate. All this really comes down to why does it matter is that we hate waiting. We're just impatient. Like, we live in a time now where we're all impatient. We don't want to wait 10 seconds. We don't want to wait 5 seconds, 3 seconds, much less 30 seconds or a minute sometimes. And all this is due to one of these points breaking down, whether it's on the server side, whether it's configuration of the hardware or the data source, or how that's structured, or how the hardware is for the data, or what the queries look like that are going to the data source, or the complexity of your calculations, the types of data that you're trying to render, or the calculation types, and the filters that you're putting on it, or the actual number of marks that you have on your dashboard. All of those things contribute to why you have a workbook that is degrading and not performing the way that you would expect. And there are a lot of ways to go around that. And I'm going to give a lot of little tips. I'm going to dive into Tableau directly and show some examples. And sometimes it's just for the sake of time, I'm going to cover off some high-level ideas along the way. So this is what we're talking about, performant workbooks. And where to begin, I think Tyler did a great job. He just mentioned performance recording, so that's where I recommend going first. And to get to that, you've got a little help menu, and I should actually just show this. So here's the workbook that I've created just for this example. I've got a classic example of we have to create a table, and it's got every sort of breakdown on it. And what we want to do is know where performance is degrading. And the number one thing you can do to figure that out is you could guess and start going through a checklist, but the number one thing is to go to help and then go down to settings and performance and start performance recording. And then once you start your performance recording, what you do is you just start interacting with the dashboard as if you were an end user, changing filters, seeing how performance looks. I'm not going to run it right now, but I can just say, right, if I were like, all right, let's come in here and I'm going to deselect some dates. And then as I deselect them, oh, my performance was real. I mean, it wasn't that slow because I'm working with a very small data set on an extract. So it was a little bit slow. Maybe there's something going on there, and I could break down with performance recording exactly what's happening behind the scenes with Tableau. And that's what the performance recorder does. Let's see, I have an output of that performance summary. So after you do that, you would just go back up to help and choose stop performance recording. And then this is the output that would come of it. Here's an example of performance recording that I've done just for an existing workbook that I had laying around. It's for promotional planning, and I've got lots of different queries that are happening, and it sort of says what exactly is taking all this up all the time. So there's a lot of compile query going on, some really initial calculations. If I just bring my filter back down to 0, you can see every single call that Tableau had to do, whether it's creating a query to get the data, doing rendering, sort of names off all those things. And this is the output from an efficient version of the same dashboard. I once had this exact same dashboard, same data, where my queries were at 20 seconds. And what I was able to do is dive in and say, all right, if I've got this query that's taking a while, let me see if I can't find one that would be a good one. Executing query. Let's pull this one. No, I can find something good. But anyway, I think the point is that you would then be able to use this to figure out where a breakdown is in your dashboard, and then dive in and use the actual tips that we'll show here today to fix your workbook. And that's the real big point of why you want to use performance recording, is actually diagnosing where the issues break down. And you can use this on Tableau Server too. In fact, I prefer to use it on server, but I can't use it for an example because I don't have an actual setup. I have Tableau online, and you can't run it on Tableau online. But yeah, there's the output and where I can start working from it. Number two, the thing that you can do is if you're really interested in it, you can dive into your Tableau repository, and like one of the options is log, and it logs every single thing that you're doing on your in that workbook. And then you can open up a workbook and actually go in and edit those if you, or like try to understand what's going on. If you're super like really trying to figure it out. Anyway, let's talk about what you can do on server. And you're probably saying, all right, server admins, yeah, you've got a lot of tuning options, but you're not a server admin. What can you do that actually affects server? And the number one thing you can do particularly is helping with the caching. And to help with caching, the best way to describe this, if you're a novice, is that Tableau will take a snapshot of what your dashboard looks like and save it off for when you return or someone returns with the exact same setup for that dashboard. And that saves on load time. And you want to minimize, you want to get the right cache set up for a workbook based on the amount of times it's being viewed. So how can you help? The number one thing you can do is change your dashboards and make sure you never select automatic or range and only use the fixed dashboard. When you use automatic or you use range, what Tableau has to do is take a snapshot of the exact dimensions of your dashboard on your desktop or on your tablet or on your mobile device, and that forces it to only have constraints based on the exact constraints you have. If someone else has a different machine with a different screen size, it's going to have to re-render it to that size. It's not going to cache it. It's not going to load fast. So by you using a fixed size dashboard, when someone loads it up, it's going to render, it's going to cache it. And then someone else who logs in to see that same dashboard may have that same cache available for them, depending on the settings of your admin, but you're certainly helping out. The other thing you can do is on server, you can delete all the content you're not using. Do yourself a favor or do your admin a favor and get rid of the extra stuff. It's going to free up resources on your server to make sure that your dashboard, the one that's important, gets the load time and priority that's necessary. Those are super easy things to do. And that's just server stuff. And it's not even if you're a server admin, what you can do. On the data source side, there are a couple things to consider. First is, should you use a live connection or an extract? Generally speaking, the answer is almost always use an extract. When it's on server, it performs, an extract generally performs faster because of the way they can call the data. It's just more efficient to an extract. But really, it depends on the infrastructure that you have set up and how it's configured. If you have a really, really well-tuned database and you have data that's coming in every second, every minute, and you need that live connection, that totally makes sense. But again, almost always, make sure you use an extract, and that'll pick up performance. And that's all I want to say about data source. I felt like I had some more points in there, but let's leave it there. Oh, there it is. Whatever, random filter slide got moved. The next piece is just a general statement that we'll dive into more, and that's to minimize the queries to the data. So a big piece you have to remember, and again, you're like, Luke, how do I minimize the queries to my data? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, that's not my expertise. Well, just know that every viz you create and that you put on a dashboard performs at least a single query. If you've got commonality, and one thing that's really important to remember is that if you've got a dashboard and you have common traits, like it's a series of line charts where it's all across the same time period, but it's just a different measure, those queries can be combined, and Tableau will combine all of those together. But when you have different visualizations with different aggregates on them, it becomes a little bit slower. And when you have something that's really large, like a table that has essentially calls everything back, it's going to run extremely slow. I always ask myself, okay, how many sheets do I have on here? Is there a limit? No, there's not a limit. It really depends on the complexity of how much data you're trying to bring back and how those queries are going to vary. If you have 20 sheets and a lot of them look identical, it's really not going to perform too slow. But if you have 20 sheets and all of the visuals kind of look at different metrics in different ways, yeah, that's going to start to degrade performance. And I think the key thing, though, in all of this is, are the data answering all the questions that are being asked by your audience? And is it do you really need all of that? And could you have like supplemental views potentially? The other piece is this an actual unique view that you have coming in? That speaks to, again, the point of maybe you have similar queries that are happening and you maybe don't need that viz, or maybe it helps because it's not unique that it runs a combined query. Extract. And this is where I wrote some notes down for myself because I knew I would forget exactly what I wanted to talk about here. The big thing with a data source is you're eventually going to want to clean up that and only show the data that's needed. If you have extra dimensions, extra measures, you're going to want to hide those. You're going to want to remove those again, and you want to create an extract. So what I often do is I'll create that extract, and I'll make sure that I'm just pulling in the information I want. And to do so means I don't need to put everything on a visual. So here's that same table that I just shown just a few minutes ago. And you'll see this table uses Superstore, and it brings in a whole bunch of information, and not all of it is totally relevant. And often where I find where there's extraneous information that we're bringing into our dashboards is in tooltips. Like we spend too much time trying to make the perfect tooltip or have all the information in tooltips, but no one actually uses them the way that they should. In fact, I'm of the variety of tooltips aren't very useful unless you're going to write to your audience directly in text somewhere and say, tooltips available and the information that's going to be there. It's just, it's secondary information. It's not to me intuitive, even as an end user, that a tooltip is going to be useful. It's always going to be what I see as the primary display. So I could get rid of extra dimensions and measures on my marks card to help create a more efficient query. In this exact case, I could get rid of ship date, which is this very bottom dimension. I've got an aggregate that comes in here that just shows the total number of manufacturers. I'm not sure why I need to show that. I've got the postal code. Maybe I want some of this information, but really, does it matter? Like I have customer name in here. If I really wanted that, I would have put it out in my table, or I would have a filter for it. But I don't need this information. And I have a whole host of filters, and I want to make sure that if you're going to have a filter, really think about, do you need it? In general, I try to push my audiences and my stakeholders to just say 3 to 5 filters. And if you need to have more than that, or you need a different cut of it, come up with another view. This is not, it's not ever going to be performant in the way that it's set up of having all these rows and all these filters. Because if you think about this, I have to then query the data. I have to pull all of these dimensions, all these measures as aggregates, and they all have to run some calculation to roll up, and then also includes all these filters and all these marks. So all of this is running in a single query. And if you were to just run that in a SQL query, in general, it wasn't going to be fast anyway. So especially with tables is where we'll see performance start to degrade. The next point is if you do have to write custom SQL, I in general try to avoid it. And when you load in your data, you're like, I've got this SQL query. I've either written it or I've had someone write it for me because I needed a certain subset of data, and it joins multiple tables together. And part of this is removed via the noodle that is now available, but it doesn't always solve the problem. Where Tableau can help now with the noodle, or just using Tableau in the older versions, because I know not everybody's going to be upgraded. I know that I still do work on 10.5, given that one of my clients has not upgraded server in a very long time. So the best thing to do instead of having one query that loads in all the data and sort of grabs each table and sort of joins them and does all this work is to load in each table separately into Tableau, do the joins in Tableau, let Tableau and the power of its developers that have SQL experts do the queries that are going to be optimized for the data that is required to be returned. And if you have these group by and order by calculations and they really do matter and you really need them, I would definitely recommend is building some sort of intermediate table in your data source that you can connect to, rather than calling this query. It's just, again, you're going to improve performance. Imagine that when you load that data in, you have to go through that custom SQL query to begin with. And the last bit is maybe you're working with tens of millions of rows and there's no way for you to avoid it. You've got to load this in, and Tableau is just not running as fast as it can because, like, again, maybe it's not even tens of million rows. Maybe you have 100 million plus rows that you need to run analysis on. What can you do? Well, when you create your extract, there's an option that says aggregate data to visible dimensions, and you could roll up your data automatically in Tableau to show only aggregates at those dimensions that are necessary. If you're going to do this and you have dates, just pay attention to the roll-up dates too, because that's ultimately going to affect how those values roll up. Potentially, you might want to just roll them up to the day and then sort of roll those day levels into the aggregate form that you would see on the viz. It's something to think about, but it's definitely improved performance. And if you're going to use visible dimensions, I would just say, remember how you're going to weight your values. So if you're going to do something like, one thing that comes up often when I'm working in Tableau is this idea of discount. And if you're going to take the average of the discount, it would be a weighted average, right? You would weight it on maybe the number of orders or the actual dollars of the sales. Just know when you are working with aggregates that you're also going to often have to have a weighted value that you're going to have to work with. I would love to go into that more, but time permitting, we'll just move on to calculations, because I actually think this is where the bulk of where you can be extremely successful. I think often what we run into is that we're trying to build out a calculation and we're not sure how to get to the solution, so we just start piecemealing our calculations together, and until we sort of land on something that works. And it, that just happens to all of us. We're just like, I don't know why it works. It just works, and I'm going to leave it. And I don't care how the calculation looks, because if I start cleaning it up and I break something, then I have to figure it all out again. So there's a little bit of fear to make efficient calculations after you've gone down that path. The first and easiest tip is to use Tableau's native functionality over building calculations. And I'm going to show you each of these inside of Tableau. You've got groups or sets that you could use over a calculation. You've got bins, you've got custom date fields, formatting, alias versus a new dimension. Let's take a look at what those look like. So with groups, I think this is pretty intuitive, is that, hey, maybe I should use groups. So Tableau in the Superstore data set has a group already created for manufacturer. And if I just edit it, I can show you that it sort of just groups products, which is further down the hierarchy, together based on the product name. And it sort of just picked this the first name or the first word or second word, depending how it's set up, and grouped them all together. And someone did this manually in Tableau, but it's really going to perform a lot better than if I were to go in and say, create a custom calculation that does the work for me. So I would say, like, if the product name contains 3D systems, let's give the manufacturer name 3D systems. Else if it's 3M, if it contains ACO, then I'll show ACO. If it shows Acme, I'll show Acme, and I could go on and on and on and on. I think it's, we try to avoid, we're like, I don't want to create groups because I have to manually control these. But the reality is it's going to be faster, extremely faster than if I were to list off 1,000 potential manufacturers here. And hopefully you just have a column in your data for this. That would be the most efficient way. But if you do need to create groups on the fly, use groups, don't use a calculation. The next is bins. Bins were my least favorite friend. I always did these via calculation because I was like, I think I can do it better with calculation than how binning can do it. And there's a couple of ways that I've seen these bin calculations done in the past. I have these two base calculations. And by the way, we're binning based on the total sales of an order. So to create those bins, I actually need two calculations. The first way I've seen it done is that someone creates, like, if sum of sales is less than 100, let's bin it in 0. If it's less than 200, we'll bin it in 100, on and on and on. And again, you're building out this calculation for going back a long, long time. I don't even have all the data being brought into this bin. And then from there, you've got another calculation where I needed to aggregate those up to the order ID. So I'm creating an actual bin based on that calculation using this level of detail calculation. And if I bring this out on my view, you know, it's going to look basically the same. I didn't go all the way, so I have these null values, but I can just hide that, and you'll see the profile of it is going to look the same as if I use a bin. And I've seen it other ways where that calculation is something as simple as this. This is a very elegant way of binning by groups of 100 rather than having to use an if statement. So here's another way that I could do that binning that is technically not the best way to go about it. My bin calculation, again, is just a level of detailed calculation that I can just click and drag this value out, and I'll move it back to a dimension. And you'll see, again, breaking every bin out by 100 values. This is not the best way to do it. It seems like, oh, it works, but in reality, I can just use my sales by order ID bin that I created it earlier. It's just a bin on that calculation, and you'll see that it breaks out perfectly just fine. By the way, this sales by order ID bin calculation is just this calculation where I'm just doing order ID, fixing it at the order ID level. Let's aggregate it to order ID and then break that out by sum of sales. And that creates my bins that you'll see here. And this is the more efficient way to do it. Another spot where I really see people sort of, I think, take the easy route and not think about the efficient route is the use of the year and month calculations. So Tableau has built-in functionality where I can create a new calculator field and just say month, and I could use, say, order date, the day things were ordered, and this works. But really, Tableau is relying on month being two separate calculations. So I can just order date, and it's at the month level. This is really two separate calculations that happen behind the scenes, and it's not super efficient. I did not save that. I did not. There it is. Order date month as a dimension, and you'll see it's a numeric value. That's great, but what if I wanted to say January, February, March? Well, I use month of order date up here, and that is just not as efficient as if I were to use two other calculations. And the first one is date part, and all I have to do is say month in there and then specify order date. This is the more efficient way to do this, and I'm just going to copy and paste this in here because it'll basically return the same thing. Of course, don't copy and paste things too fast in Tableau. Let's try that again. I'll come up here, create an ad hoc calculation, and you'll see it returns the exact same values, and the base calculation is actually the same thing. But what's happening behind the scenes is that if I use month, returns a numeric value, but I could, change that to be continuous, and I get the same value. It provides the flexibility of date part as, again, just more efficient from a SQL standpoint. And the other is date name, and I can use either or. They do the same thing. One just provides the name, and one provides the numeric value. Here's one, moving on to the next one, again, trying to scramble to get through as much as I can in the next 10 minutes, is formatting, where I often see, and I'm totally guilty of this one, is that I've got a parameter here that allows me to change metrics on my axis. So I've got sales showing right now, and you'll see the value showing here. is a numeric value, and it's got the $sign, and everything looks really good. And then I switch to profit ratio, and that's a percent, and that percentage also shows up really nicely on this view. Let me just close Slack. You'll see it shows up nicely on this view. And I have this axis label that's showing up, and it's just a single calculation. And if I take a look at it, you will see this is not a fun calculation. What it's got going on in here is kind of lots of mistakes, lots of novice mistakes. One, I'm converting this profit ratio. When I choose profit ratio from my drop down, from my parameter, it's going to convert it to a string, and then it adds a percent sign after it. And I do some formatting with round. When I choose the dollar value, when I choose the other value in the parameter, I'm going to put a $sign, and then I'm going to do if statement, and I'm going to look for the length of that number. Is it, how many digits is it? If it's less than 4, I don't need a comma, and I'll just format that with no comma. If it's less than 7, so it only needs 1 comma, I'll format that for 1, basically numbers in the thousands. And if it's in the millions, I've got values in the millions. What happens when I would potentially get to hundreds of or a billion? I'd have to have another way to format this going forward. And again, I've done this, but there's a lot of issues in here. And of them, the big one that is sort of breaking things down is that I'm converting numeric values to strings. When you're doing a type conversion, whether it's changing a number to text or any sort of breakdown of changing those values inside of Tableau, you are not going to see performance. That's where breakdown is going to happen. And then the other big breakdown here is the use. I'm sort of nesting an if statement inside of a case statement. Nesting if, and we'll get to this one, but nesting these statements, not the best idea. Anyway, we've got this, and the best way to do this would instead just create separate measures for each type of metric. So I have a percentage, profit ratio, just showing that value. And I have a $sign for any dollar values. And I would instead just place those out on text. And when I change my metric, it will change those values. And I can just control just those individual values instead. You'll notice in these statements, if I edit it again, it's just case when those values are relevant. I don't include any of the irrelevant values that wouldn't need to be formatted. And lastly is alias, and the use of alias. If I have, say, a common example would be in my data set, I've got machines, and I actually decide to change machines to electronics. It's just a new name for a value. I would just go in and I would edit my calculation to change from machines to electronics. This is not the way to do it. This adds an additional query. Instead, what I would want to do is just right-click and edit the alias and change machines and the alias to electronics. This is a much faster way of doing the getting performance out of Tableau. Sort of just watching the time tick by. A couple others that I would really want to call out is that you try to simplify your logical statements. I talked about this sort of a little bit. Use Boolean. Let's skip ahead. I'm just trying to pick the ones that are going to be the most useful. Your if statements. I think if statements are very right. We all use them at some point. The way you should really think about them if you're having performance issues is if you're running an if statement, put the things that happen most common in the if statement. So if you have some like outliers and you're doing a calculation on the fly here and you have some null values and you're like, all right, I know there's an if null function, but if I were to say if is null order date or any value here, if somehow I have an order date that's null, what should I do with it? Then let's assign it a date value of 1/1/20 2010 or something. Else order date. Really, the majority of my date fields are not going to be null, but I'm handling them in a certain way here. Instead, I want this where the majority are not being affected to be on the front half of my calculation inside my if statement. So I can say if not is null, and I could swap these values around. And that is one way to gain additional performance. The other is avoid putting nested if statements, right? I can have an if statement here. If it's not null, then this, else if I've got something else that's happening and I add another if statement. Instead of having a second if statement, we could say like, is null order date, and a second argument, which could be category is equal to technology. Then have something happen. So avoid having nested if statements, and what else if. Then have something else happen, and now I've got an error. But it's just an example that I'm trying to run through on the fly. But the idea is use the else if over the other values date. And again, if you can avoid overlapping logic, meaning like if you are, I have my example of, right, if I have the earlier statement that I had in here has overlapping logic, I think that was in the binning. So if you have overlapping logic with, say, your bins in Calc 1, you'll notice my calculation technically doesn't overlap totally, but it also does. I said less than 100, and then I ran some logic for it. And then I said less than 200. Well, technically, it's 0 to 200 that I'm looking through for this. And I'm looking 0 to 300 for this next statement. And they're already covered off, and but there's still overlapping logic that your calculations have to run through. So there's a way that you can sort of improve your performance there. And then I added this one very last minute, watching the time. I'm like going to end very quickly and abruptly through this to make sure everybody's out on time. But a big one is trying to keep your row calculations at the row, or your calculations at the row level as long as possible. What I see all of the time is, let's see if I can find, hopefully I created this calculation. Sales versus segment, no, I did not. So one that I see often is I'm like, all right, I want the sum of sales, but I only want it for technology. So I say if category is equal to technology, then show me the sum of sales. And you get a breakdown because you have an aggregate and a dimension, or sorry, a low-level dimension, and there's a way to get around it that I see people use, and that's use the attr function, and that creates this aggregate. Ideally, you don't do it this way because you have to run a query on category and sales before you actually run this logic. Instead, you say something to the effect of if category is equal to technology, then sales, and then you wrap all of this in the sum function. And that is a much more efficient way of running the query. We've kept it at the row level as long as possible before aggregating it up. And the last thing I'll call out is that often, this again happens all the time, the use of this attribute function. Tableau recommends it on a lot of things, but behind the scenes, I'm just going to skip way ahead. Oh, actually, it's the next slide. Is try to avoid the use of the attr function. Instead, use like min or max, because the attribute function is basically a function in itself looking for the minimum and maximum value, and then returning the minimum value if they match, and if they don't, returning a star. So it's running an extra query every time this shows up. And where that'll happen most often is where I'll see it is in our workbooks, right? We're going to create this table, and again, on the tooltips, we're like, let's get as much detail in there as possible. But when we use totals, we've got some occasional overlap, so we don't want to sort of ruin how the calculation's rolling through. Instead, you know, we drop in here and we just use attributes as sort of the habit. The better option is to come in here and just change these to minimum. It's not going to affect the calculation. It will affect the tooltip because now that min state is the first state that shows up, which is Oklahoma. And while Aaron is not in Oklahoma for all 3 of his orders, that's what's going to show up. But it is going to improve performance. I have a host of other things that we could cover off at any given point, just because, you know, that I sort of threw this together over the weekend, and while I was watching Survivor last night, trying to get as many ideas together on how to improve performance. This workbook and presentation will eventually be available. I'm going to record it and make a YouTube video out of it and make it available to everybody. But the sort of big things to take away is, one, a lot of what you do and when you have a poor performing workbook is due to a lot of bad decisions, not a single thing that's happening. Occasionally, it can be broken down to one bad thing, which might be nested LODs or nested table calculations where it really starts to slow down. That definitely will slow it down. 2, make sure you're using extracts. 3, if you can keep your data organized and you can keep your worksheets organized, you will likely have performing dashboards. Just pay attention to what's going on filters, what's going on your marks card, what's going on everywhere, and sort of try to keep things to a minimum. Minimize your drill downs and minimize your marks. In general, when you're talking about how to create a performance dashboard, just remember if you can convert something to a Boolean, a true false, it's going to perform better. And then the next most efficient thing is a number, and then the next most efficient thing is a string, and the least performant thing is a date calculation. If you can sort of push some of these ideas to a higher level, your dashboards will be a lot more performant, and they will eventually become very fast. It looks like I'm a little bit over on time, so I guess I will pass this back over.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Amelia. I just want to first say thank you very much, Luke. That was an excellent job. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, thumbs up if you can see it. Okay, awesome. All right, so I'll be brief here. I just want to remind everyone of some materials. So our next TUG meeting is slated for July. It's all tentative at this point, but do be on the lookout on our LinkedIn page, Twitter, and for our follow-up email on more info on that. We will also be posting recordings and materials from today on our Google Drive. So for July, we are looking for speakers. If you're interested, please reach out to us at pghtug@gmail.com. Or if you want to host, or if you have any feedback, that's where you can reach us as well. We're also looking for community members to share some Tableau stories on how you use Tableau at work, or if you have any little tips and tricks. Nothing major, 5 to 10 minutes. So again, reach out to us. Okay, a reminder to subscribe to our Splash newsletter. You can do so on usergroups.tableau.com/Pittsburgh if you have not already done so. When you subscribe to that, you'll get these follow-up emails. So after today, we'll get a follow-up here. And resources, so the link to the Google Drive is circled here. It'll be in that email with a direct link to the Google Drive. And another reminder on how to make the most out of your quarantine, a lot of great resources here. We hope you can get involved with some of these. All right, so thank you again very much to our panelists. It was an awesome event. Thank you also to Tableau community and Caroline for helping us set this up. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending. We hope you learned a lot and enjoyed the event. And stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you all hopefully in July.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.